Hello, I'm Lauren Apter Bairnsfather. I'm director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and I am joining Prime Stage Shares to share a story from the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps 75 years ago. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh has worked with Prime Stage on a number of projects, and currently we work with Wayne Brinda, who is a Holocaust educator in his own right, to bring teacher training to teachers in middle schools and high schools who are teaching the play The Diary of Anne Frank and learning how to incorporate practices from theater in their classrooms. It's been a very exciting partnership, and I have nothing but respect for Prime Stage, so I'm so happy to be with you today to share a story. Some years ago, the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh published a book called Flares of Memory, and this is what it looks like. Flares of Memory includes vignettes written by Holocaust survivors and by liberators of the Nazi camps, and includes a story by a woman named Marjorie Butterfield, and I would like to share her story today. Marjorie Butterfield was a nurse, and she was by rank first lieutenant in the 59th Field Hospital with the Third Army. This is Gusen, a nurse's tale. We arrived at Gusen concentration camp in Austria about 2 weeks after the camp had been liberated. I was an army nurse, assigned to the 59th Field Hospital. The camp was surrounded by a high wall, the terrain barren, the buildings drab. Over 1,000 men with shaved heads either sat dejectedly on the ground or aimlessly milled about. They were all so emaciated, they looked as if they could hardly stay alive. Actually, many of them didn't. Every morning, a truck picked up the dead bodies and took a full load to the cemetery nearby. The patients in the hospital were suffering from tuberculosis, typhus, infections, anemia, and diseases caused by severe vitamin deficiency. When taking care of our wounded soldiers in the field hospital, we had plenty of antibiotics, whole blood, plasma, and intravenous feedings. Here, there was a tremendous shortage of all these necessities. We felt helpless. If ever patients needed to be comforted, needed tender, loving care, these unfortunate souls did. But it was difficult because of the language barrier. All of us, doctors, nurses, and corpsmen, were given the opportunity to take German lessons. But progress was slow, and I hoped that I could convey, by a tender touch or the look on my face, that I cared. Although we had enough food for ourselves, there was not enough for the patients. One day on my way to our mess hall, I saw 2 men boiling chicken feet that had been thrown in the garbage to make soup. I couldn't eat my lunch that day. On the women's ward, there were only about 65 patients, and they were in better physical shape than the men. Many were well educated and could speak English. They were of various nationalities and religions. They told me about the hardships, indignities, and cruelties they had endured. None of them knew what had happened to their families, except for those who had seen them killed or led to the gas chambers. One day there was great excitement among the women. One of them had started her menstrual period. Stress and malnutrition had caused all of them to cease having periods. Since one of them became a, quote, normal woman, they all felt it would soon happen to them, too. All the nurses longed to see the women smile, and we found how little gifts brought out those bright looks. Since we couldn't shop in a store, we searched our belongings to give them makeup, underwear, pens, pencils, toothpaste, toothbrushes, and combs. Our patients were courageously determined to make new lives for themselves as they began to have hope now that the war was over. Their first goal was to find out about their families, and our Red Cross workers began to search for information for them. But perhaps that hope was in vain, as after 2 months, the camp was put in the Russian zone of the Army of Occupation, and our hospital was sent to Czechoslovakia. I tried to suppress all the memories of that camp, and I refused to talk about it when I returned. But one evening, 40 years later, I heard a man on television saying that the Holocaust never happened, and that it was false propaganda to turn people against the Germans. Then I knew I finally had to speak. That story shows the bravery of nurses and liberators of the Nazi concentration camps, and also how difficult it was to speak about the experience of being there at the end of that horrific period, seeing the results of the Nazis' cruelty and depravity. Marjorie Butterfield is no longer living, but I am grateful for this opportunity to share her story and to thank her posthumously. Marjorie, thank you for telling your story. Holocaust denial is still pervasive, and it is up to us to make sure that these stories stay alive, that these memories stay alive, and that we all remember the Holocaust. Thank you so much to Prime Stage for inviting me to share this story.